Hey everybody, welcome once again to Rise of the GM, where today we're going to talk about a strange mist over the continent. We're going to talk about a ruthless thug that might not be as bad as he seems, and why in the heck does the world even need a hero? Here on Rise of the GM. Well, it is good to be back here again. Today we have a couple, 3 topics, and I'm not going to lie to you right at the outset. We're not sure exactly what we're going to say about any of these, but you know what? It's going to be good. And as long as it goes, it goes. We'll come up with some good stuff. Maybe some of you out there also will have some good stuff you can contribute either in the comments or as you come to the haversack later with more questions. But Adam, how are you today? It's been one of those crazy cold weeks. We just are coming out of that super cold. We had some -7 here, but I know that up in Chicago they had some like -13 or greater, and crazy. Just a pain. None of your pipes froze up, did they?
Nope, not this year yet.
Yes,
yet. I am excited about that.
We are going back into another 3 days of cold before next week. 1 week from today, I think it's supposed to be 57-degree high here.
That's wild.
Now that's 7 days out, and sometimes it adjusts as you get closer. But I mean, just looking at that temperature next week is hard to fathom.
Honestly, even if it's half of that, I would take it.
Yeah,
it's like almost 30 degrees. Awesome. So.
I know. As long as the night doesn't get down below 0. Actually, if it would get like up into the double digits, I'm happy, because then otherwise we're running like several heaters, and I just don't even want to see my heating bill next month.
Just don't look at it. Hey, something I was gonna throw in here at the beginning is I have had some cool, just like little side conversations about gaming and kind of spurred on from the podcast over the last couple of weeks. And I just wanted to say thanks to people listening and watching and taking part in like Instagram and on Twitter and that kind of stuff, because that's been a really cool experience for me to be able to like bounce some ideas or just like know people are listening. And I know, Matthew, you don't like see that quite as much in those kind of conversations, but it's been really neat to, and like touching for me, like to know there's people who are watching and who are getting some cool ideas from this. So just wanted to say thanks to all of you.
Yeah. And if you are on socials and you're reaching out, know that it is Adam you're reaching out to. I am not the social guy. I don't really ever open my social media very, very often. So I'm very, very glad that Adam takes care of that. And if you reach out to him and you get a response, it is all his wisdom and none of my fodder.
Like, this is Matthew speaking.
Hello, this is Matthew. You're an idiot.
Did I make you mad? This is Matthew. No, that's it's been fun. So
yeah. Well, today we are going to do one of our encounter ideas that we do sometimes, the ones from the Eureka book, the Gnome Stew book. But today we're doing one from another place. What was the place again?
This is Dungeon Influence. We've done a few. I think this is the 3rd one we've done since we started the podcast. And episode 24, right?
Yeah, this is episode 24. You know what that means? What does that mean?
It means next week is 25.
It means that next week is 25. And when we get to 26, we're going to have half a year's worth.
That's wild.
Right? Of
That's
weeks.
Right. Yeah.
If you're doing it every week, there's 52 weeks in a year. So getting there.
6 months. It's awesome.
So anyway, let's hear about this encounter starting idea.
Yeah, again, if you're on Instagram, this is Dungeon Influence, and they have really good prompts. We may use some others sometime, but they have prompts that this is a game hook is what they call it. This is game hook 47. If you want to like search some of those up, but they have NPCs, they have items, and they have just like conversation starters too that are kind of cool, just to help like spark if you're kind of in a rut. Sometimes that's a helpful thing. So this is the game hook, real short. A weird mist starts to cover the whole continent. Strange sounds of movement are heard from the mist. And that's it. Just a little prompt, little hook. So
little prompt. So You're given this kind of encounter prompt.
Mhm.
You're getting ready for a game. What
Yeah.
does your brain do?
Yeah.
You're like,
I was
I
hoping
wasn't
you
ready
were
for
going to
you
go
to
for
throw
no.
that back at me yet.
Yeah. One of the things I immediately don't want to do is pull a Mistborn
Well, I
and
was
like,
just going to say, and first thing every one of us thought of is, oh yeah, Mistborn. That's those creatures out there, the gelatinous things, right?
yeah,
Sucking up
yeah,
bones.
right. Yeah. I like the idea of, one, okay, it says it's starting to cover the whole continent. And I would like start thinking if I'm okay, I want to use this. Uh is it actually like continent wide, or is this a very localized thing that like feels like, oh, it's like taking over everything, but it's specific to like where maybe the characters are in the moment too. And if it's that, or even if it is taking over the whole continent, but it seems to be, obviously they have been maybe not the epicenter, but they've been close to it. Obviously something's going on very specific to them there. And I kind of like the idea of almost that being um, a distraction or a cover for goings on, maybe some kind of cult, or some kind of like movement of even like, what if somebody was moving an armed force under the cover of these magical mists that were taking place because they were, trying to take over something, or that's something that kind of comes to my brain with that, of like using it as a, okay, this weird mist is out there and nobody's going to go out into they're not going outside, at night or whatever, because we can't see anything. And this is able to, like, we're able to use that under the cover of that. We're going to move our army, or we're going to do these like nefarious things that we're trying to keep out of the prying eyes of other people. So that's like one thing it kind of comes from me. And then you have this chance to like hook in, okay, the PCs are stumbling around in this mist, maybe finding out some of these things. So I don't know. You have thoughts on that?
My first thoughts kind of center are kind of in line with what you just said. In that, it for me, I have to make a decision. Is this going to be something that begins to happen right here with like you said, we're close to the epicenter or at the epicenter, and we have to decide what's happening? Or is this something that you start hearing reports, and so your
Oh yeah.
characters are going through whatever you're finishing up, and you're hearing somebody who just traveled a long distance say, "There's something going on up in the north because." This fog and mist. Some of my family and I left, and we headed down this way. And then you don't
Right.
see those people anymore. You continue doing whatever encounter you're on now, and then a little later, more people start coming into town, and there's these talk
Yeah.
of this mist, and then maybe shortly after, some tendrils of mist start coming into town, and then the next thing you know, it's like pea soup, and you guys are in it. So they have a chance to hear about it, maybe over days or even a week or two, because of say this first guy who got out, he's a well-worn traveler, and he is an adventurer or something, and he left early, and then later you start getting, some of the running. Wildlife, or some of the
Right.
like the even the trolls, orcs, whatever, that don't understand this, and they're kind of running from it. It's like that forest fire where you have all the animals
Yeah.
running
Yeah.
out. And then lastly, you get the people who like were trying to stay, but now they're like totally freaked out and uprooted from their homes, and they're coming in, and you got this whole force of people with no homes anymore
Right.
coming in, and it's the whole situation. The town's trying to figure out, what do we do with all these people, and where do we house them, and how do we
Right.
get them fed? And now, oh no, here this is coming. What do we do about this? And then maybe you're contacted by the government or the local community.
Yeah.
That could be one way.
Right.
And then the other place my thoughts went was it could be either something truly supernatural that portends worse things coming, or it could be totally natural, something that happens maybe every 100 years. And there's a prophecy that this happens every 100 years because the great volcano opens and the cold air spills in and makes a mist that travels the land. And really it's just a natural phenomenon, but under guise of that, someone decides I'm going to take advantage and either
Mm,
make some money. I'm going to profit off of this in some way, or like
yeah.
you were talking about, under cover of this, I'm going to finally move my army against my neighbor so that they don't know this is coming,
Right.
and we get the surprise. But they obviously knew that this is something that has happened before because it's in their histories, whatever. So again, I have to make this choice of, is this a truly, you know, the calling card of evil coming. This
Right.
is something super bad, or this is something that just happens, but only certain people know about it, and therefore they're
Yeah.
taking advantage of it under the guise. So I would make that decision, and then I would begin to populate it with whatever. So if it's just
Yeah.
natural people, you can have whatever you want and whatever reason being under there. It's a little more exciting if it is something supernatural. If it's something that is one of those things that hook your characters into, the world needs this stopped, and I guess here we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll be the hero,
Uh,
and they go against, and then you can start to populate it with, what is it that they hear the sounds of, and
right.
you can think of those mistborn type things, or you can think of
Right.
something totally different or
Mhm.
something totally crazy from another totally different environment that has
Yeah.
come up from the belly of the earth, or that has come down
Right.
from the skies or out of the seas, or maybe something ethereal that's come only in the mist and they
Mhm.
only are incorporeal and fight in the mist. Those kinds of
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
fun to do also. So there's a lot of ways your brain could go. And part of it is sitting down and making some decisions and deciding, okay, this is where my characters are in their development.
Right.
If they're just starting out, that might be the thing that hooks everything and starts the campaign. If they're going about following another task, this could be something that furthers your agenda as the GM, or just gives them some stuff to do when they find out it's just armies moving against one
Yeah.
another or whatever.
Yeah. I like that. And I would probably actually, thinking about it now, be pulled more of this direction that you were saying of the foreshadowing kind of element of that,
Mm.
of like, early in the campaign, this adventurer coming in, or refugees, or my bard in the corner of the tavern
Hmm.
who's singing a song about this, and it's like this stuff is happening, and foreshadowing that and letting the game play out a little bit, but then uh, you know maybe maybe they go to investigate on their own. Maybe there's a quest given that takes them into that area. Maybe the game like circles around that for a while, and then eventually they go into it because of whatever the arc, the story is that's taking them there. But I do like that idea of them hearing about it more than just being like, it's a different kind of story if you're just like immediately thrust. You wake up one day and the world's covered in mist, versus you're hearing about this thing that may be growing, or maybe it's just a weird spot. So I do like that, of just the uh, yeah, foreshadowing and hearing,
And
and
I think
dropping
it
the
feels
hints.
more like our world today, where you
Hmm.
hear about like hardship and atrocities and war and
Yeah,
stuff going on in faraway lands, but it's not here, not where we live in America, and so it just seems further away. But then, if something changed and all of a sudden all of that started coming here,
yeah,
it changes your mind and your life, and so that's something that people can relate to in a
yeah,
sense, even
yeah,
though
for
it's
sure.
not going to be those same things.
Right.
It
Yeah,
could be that we've heard always about the mist in the north.
yeah, yeah. It
We
plays
it's
on that.
been in song, it's been in we've heard tale, but now it's starting to come this way. And why? What's
Yeah.
changed? What are we going to do?
Hmm. I think it'd be interesting too to have, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're talking about, but the kind of your second piece, but like, what if the mist was like even a naturally occurring, once a year, the mists come for a 10-day span, and it's called the shroud. Like the shroud comes in October every year for 10 days. And that's like a thing that's even, it's coming. Like we know, hey, it's actually September 20th or whatever your months are in your game, and the shroud is going to appear in 2 weeks. We better batten down the hatches. We better get these things done. We need these things done. It's, I think that could even play an urgency
Right. And
Or
local
then what?
government knows that during the shroud, bad things happen because people know
Yeah.
there's cover.
Right. Yeah. So that there's even there's pieces of that too of story that could happen. So that's interesting to me too, of just like playing with it. It's like this naturally occurring phenomenon. I also really, I don't know, it could connect to this, but I love wizards screwing up and there being a magical effect that's like permanent because they did something stupid, kind of thing. And um
Forever. Yeah.
there's a we played, way back when, but the game Guild Wars, there was a in the kind of opening pre-seer, the like how to learn the game kind of section of the game, there was this area called Wizard's Folly. And I don't know the exact story, but it basically was there was a tower, and for some reason everything was frosted over, and it's like my head canon at least was always like, okay, this wizard did something stupid and frosted over this whole area, Wizard's Folly. And I actually
Yep.
ripped that off. Like that was an idea that the game that you guys are in now, there was an area that was near you guys went into, and there was the Jotun, and like the frosty area. Like that was like kind of based. It was kind of a nod to that idea. But I
Look at
love
that.
I love the idea of like, I don't know, just magic people making terrible messes of things. And so maybe somebody screwed up and now there's this giant mist. And I think you could play, if mist doesn't work for your game for whatever reason, it could be a creeping frost. It could be, I don't know, a withering, like all the plants are withering for some reason. I think it takes away a little bit of the shrouding mystery
Yeah.
of the thing if you do that. But, I think that's
But
something
it
you
could
can
add
kind of play with
something
too.
else.
Hmm.
It could
Yeah.
be that anything that, as the withering progresses, whatever is in its area loses vitality,
Hmm.
including your heroes and
Yeah.
including any enemies.
Right. Yeah. So that'd be interesting to fight on the edge of a creeping blight that's sapping things, and you're like trying to maneuver to not be in it, but you're trying to get your foes into it. I think that could be an interesting environment too. That maybe I'll steal at some point. So it's cool. Any other
Very
thoughts on
good.
that?
Yeah, no, I think that's it. I'm good for that. Well, we're going to talk about this is the interesting part today. We have a main topic.
Hmm.
We have very little idea where we're going to go with this main topic.
Yeah.
But we're going to go nonetheless, because like adventurers striking out into an adventure you're just learning, so your GMs and your
Yep.
podcast hosts sometimes strike out into the
Yeah.
unknown.
Sometimes as a GM, you don't exactly know where your characters are going to go, and you just kind of have to roll with the punches, right, and react, and
Right.
uh, yeah, improv a little bit. So we'll see. Yeah, this idea, and to kind of get into this, it's like the idea of world building. Maybe we've made this world, we've created the physical map, and here's where the cities are and the mountains, and kind of thought about maybe some of the history and myth and all these things. But in a lot of ways, for like a game, I think the game is like, it's what is going on with the party, right? So why do they need to exist, I think, is a question. And this is a little telling, I think, about at least for me, the style of game that I'm angling for, at least in a fantasy setting. And I think I could probably speak that for you too, Matthew, of like, we expect there to be heroics done, and like this group is coming together to do something epic or big, or maybe not, I don't know, world saving. I think in a lot of times is what I'm thinking, at least, is like there is a reason, there's a catalyst, there's the inciting incident, like that kind of pushes them forward, kind of thing. So like one of the things I want to get to eventually is like maybe how we've done that, like how have we maybe unified a group for a common purpose, and like when that has happened, eventually. But that's kind of the idea of just like the catalyst and why a group even needs to exist in that. Some of the stuff I was thinking about was like, this could be different scales. Um, as we talk about this, and like why is a hero needed, or why is a group of heroes, why is a party of adventurers needed, or even like looking at like a game like Red Markets, which is not about heroics really, like at all. That's not. It's about doing what you need to do in order to survive. But even in that, I think there's and that's built into the game of like, and we're eventually going to talk about this in more depth, but the the reason that a taker party, the party comes together, is to hopefully get your dependents out of zombie infested wasteland. You're wanting to get them to safety. So I think even in games like that, there is still an element of like, okay, what's the why for this? Like, what is it about the world that these people are needed to become something greater, to become something more than just themselves? And I think, like I was saying, that could be a different scale. Like, it could be um, local heroes, it could be regional or world, or like cosmic planar kind of stuff. Like, it could be any of those or anything in between. I don't think we have to think like huge epic all the time. It could be something smaller arc, but that kind of why is still the driving force, I guess, for me. So, kind of as I say that, are there like thoughts that come to your mind, Matthew, with that?
I think it can even be possible to do a mix of those
Mm,
in your game when you're talking about scales. So let's go to something that probably all of us here have witnessed and seen, and that is the D&D movie, Heroes or whatever it was, Thieves,
Honor Among Thieves. Yeah.
Honor Among Thieves. See, I know what but when you look at that and you look at, okay, what was their reason for doing any of the stuff they did? It was a couple fold. So the main character, and I am forgetting everybody's names. All I can remember is Jonathan, and that's not the main character.
That's the
main
name
character,
you need to remember, though.
that is the name.
Jonathan.
Who was the lead guy, the bard?
I got to be honest.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Maybe Josh will remember. He remembers things like this, and he's in our chat. But anyway, the bard, the main guy, his reasoning, you follow through that whole movie, has to do with his, wife
Pine.
and his little girl. What's that? Chris Pine.
I'm looking it up.
So, but anyway, his purpose had to do with both his wife and his little girl, right? So the main thing was he was trying to get his wife back, right? It says here, Edgin Davis. Is that it?
Edgin, I think. Yeah.
Darvis. Anyway, so his personal reason was his wife was gone and he was trying to get this thing to bring her back, to resurrect her, right? That's how they got caught in the first place. And in doing so, he left his little girl, and then, he has to get his little girl back and prove that he is a worthy father. But like, to get his little girl back and all of this, he enlists the help of these other people, right? And so that becomes a personal motivation. But then there's still a greater world motivation in that these red wizards who basically make living zombies of people have done this before, and they're trying to do it again. And that becomes like a kind of more epic kind of part of this story that's happening at the same time. Both of those purposes are reasons that you need heroes. If the heroes don't step in, everybody is going to be turned into these dead zombie things for the red wizards. If the heroes don't step in, this bad guy is going to get away with his daughter, take her off to another place. His wife is not going to come back. All of that's resolved through the story. And so you have this mix of personal and epic. Is what I'm really trying to get at here. Yeah. And I think that's a good thing to do with your party, because think about, why do we read fantasy books at all? We know if we're looking at books in general, we know that there's going to be some sort of conflict set up and that's going to be resolved. Right. And we could just say, well, I know that there's going to be a conflict that's going to be resolved. Why do we have to go through it? And I think it's because there's something in our lives and in our own hearts that's always searching for a couple things. One, significance, and two, overcoming I think are two big ones. There's probably more. But when I think of significance, when I was young, I would read these books and they almost all kind of had a similar feel to them. And they were, and we've talked about this before. For me, there was this feeling of the boy who was nothing. He was, the runt of the litter, the last, the least of the magic, whatever it was. And then comes to find out that he has something special that no one else has. And that's what the world needs right now. And that's the idea of, why is there a hero needed? It's this idea of personal significance. We also see the idea of the journey, like Lord of the Rings, that whole trilogy, that idea that there is this great importance of something needs to be done. And that is more along the order of epic. But even if you look at that, they're getting rid of this ring so that the world is safe from Sauron, right? That's the eye.
Yep.
I always got Sauron and Sauron mixed up. But at the same time, there's these personal things going on between Sam and Frodo, and so there's that. I had another one. I said the greater, what is that? The significance was one, and then I probably said overcoming, which I just kind of
overcoming
talked about. But it's this idea of you read a book because you want to see these inevitable odds that are stacked against the world or the people involved overcome. And so that's going to be another part of why are these people needed in the world. And when we do our personal games, I'm sure you could look back at each just like I looked at these two movies, and you could do the same thing. I look at The Dormant Mind, and it started off, a friend needed you because they were being falsely accused. That's how kind of the beginning started. But that was like a very small part of it once the whole thing got going, because it ended up that the world is indeed in danger of being overrun by some shadow figures because of somebody's greed, and you don't even know what the full ramifications of that are, but it's bad for humanity. That if this continues, humanity will cease to be in control of their own lives. They will become enslaved and subjected in some way to these shadow creatures and the shadow creature's master. And what is all that going to look like? You're figuring that out, but that that's bad, and so it's got to be overcome. In the midst of that, each of you are going through your own personal journey of finding significance. And the world needs somebody who steps up, who maybe never thought they were much, but they proved to be significant in some way. I think one of the questions you said something about when we were discussing this just a bit before the podcast started was why these people, when there are already like really powerful people in the world, there's already, and you can think about that in our world. Our world already has like the movers and the shakers. There's the Elon Musks and the people generating AI and the people in military positions and the people who are smart and rich who do all this stuff. And yet there's some part of us that likes to think somehow I could be significant in the turnings of the world. And I think we all search for that. And so I think from our players' perspective, that's what they're playing out. They're playing out like I'm in a world where maybe I don't have the same significance as all these huge, rich, politically savvy people, but yet I like to feel like my life matters in some way, maybe on a greater scale than I even understood. And so I play this game looking for that. And so if that's what our players are looking for, we as GMs are looking to make that experience happen and to show that. That's why we read books. That's why an author writes a book about a kid who is absolutely worst in his class in magic, but then ends up being like of a totally different order, who ends up, fighting off the one thing that could kill all of humanity that no one else could fight because he is different. And, we read that. He wrote that because we all have that universal pull inside us to have that significance and to overcome. So my thoughts always end up going toward the philosophical and toward the what is in our minds as readers and as players, but it's very much part of why we do this game in the first place, and why we as GMs want to make these stories in the first place. So that's one bit of this. Did that make you think of anything in particular because we are totally bouncing back and forth off of one
Yeah,
another
yeah,
today.
yeah, yeah. That kind of question that's what was stuck in my craw a little bit was the that idea of, okay, um, why does this work? Because it does, and I think you hit on that of like there is a desire in us, and maybe it is the player desire to have significance, to want to overcome, to do these things, and I don't know that we have to like convince the characters as much as the players in that sometimes, of like, and I've said this before, but I think when we sit down at the table, at least again, this is the kind of games we're tending to play, and I know different groups do different things, and um, like that's do at your table, is one team. But I think when our groups sit down at the table, there is an understanding like I am here to do this, like we're going to move into these quests, and we're going to right some wrongs, and even like if a character's maybe not necessarily good, like I think there's still like a movement towards like this is an injustice and I'm going to deal with that, or that it seems like that still plays out because the players are coming to the table that way. um, but that question, of like, okay, why does I'll use my barbarian Cormac. It's like, why does the like farmer, who lived on this little island with sheep in his family, need to step into this place of like doing these like world travels, collecting these powerful artifacts, fighting against crazy creatures, when there are like, gods speaking to people, and mages creating these wild things, and there's powerful people all through the world. Like, why is that? And I think it's like one, and you started to talk into that of like there is something special. Like somebody has something special in them that can like bring these things about, can affect change, can unlock whatever is going on. There's powers that are like harnessed within those seemingly insignificant people at first, and as they grow, that becomes something. And sometimes it's just like they're the ones willing to do the work. Maybe the powerful people are um, uh, like too busy doing their own thing, or they don't care, or
They're part of the
it's like,
problem.
yeah, it's like they're part of the problem. Yeah. And I wish I could uh oh man, I had it here. This is like maybe a silly quote, but I was thinking about National Treasure with this, and he's by the way, we probably should have done a spoiler for Honor Among Thieves telling the story, but
Oh,
if you haven't seen
we didn't tell completely how it ended. If you
that's
haven't
true,
seen
that's
Honor
true.
Among Thieves by now,
Yeah.
are you really a
Shame on
gamer?
you. Shame, shame. No.
Shame on
Um, but again, if you haven't seen National Treasure from 2004, here's a spoiler, but he has decided to steal the Declaration of Independence so that it won't be stolen.
What?
Great idea. But he makes this toast as he's about to go off and do this thing, and he says, here's to the men who did what was considered wrong in order to do what they knew was right. And like he like gives this quote where he's like amping himself up to do the right thing. And I think like um, the wrong part maybe wasn't part of what I was actually saying, but like that idea of like someone choosing, no one else no one else believed him that someone was going to steal this, and he's like, everybody thinks it's untouchable, nobody believes me, they think I'm a joke, I'm going to step up and do what's correct in this situation. I think that like it can be that I have something in me, so I can become this hero. I can have that great responsibility because I have the great power, or like maybe it's just no one else is doing what needs to be done, and I'm here and I know what needs to be done. So I'm going to move into that heroic role. And I think we can put those kind of things before our groups. Um, and some characters are going to bite on either one of those things. And I'm sure there's other options. I don't know, like, does that ring anything for you?
Well, here's so we're talking to GMs, right?
Hmm.
We're trying to like help them understand why is a hero needed here. You can always just throw out, here's something bad to happen. You guys are going to go fix
Right.
it. And that's one level of, oh yeah. And you can do that, right? You can say, you guys are going to go, you got to go fight this dragon or these shadow creatures.
Yeah.
And they go. But it's much more powerful if there's real meaning in that for them. And so part of today's talk is like, how can you make that really mean something for them? To make them feel like I'm the kind of person who's like, you know what, I know what's right to do. I'm going to step up and do it. Like you were just talking about. What is it? So one of the things, there's a couple different ways my brain's going right now. And I'm just going to throw them both out here so I don't forget them. Forget either one. One is the connections that you can make among your party members and whatever's going on. And one is what they come up with themselves. So one of the most important things that we have found for us as players and for the players that we lead as GMs is when there is ample time given for solid, full backstories to be written. I think I told you guys that I started by not even playing D&D, but I would sit with my roommate. We would sit and we would come up with a character and a full backstory of like who they were and what was the conflict in their past and why they were about anything, you know, this whole thing. Having your characters take the time to like sit down and think through these questions before starting, it's one of those things we forget to talk about sometimes because we have done it so often, but a new GM might not know that. And they might say, okay, I'm going to have a D&D game. Everybody come to my house on Thursday. Everybody gets there on Thursday. And you're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. What are you going to play? You're going to be an elf ranger. Okay. And you're going to be, this and that and a barbarian. Okay. So here's what you guys are doing. And then they give the task and everybody's like, okay, well, we do that and we roll that. And that's one level of D&D. But again, they just never were told, hey, do a session before the session, even maybe it's the session 0 where you all begin to talk about like what characters are we going to be. But the homework in there, and it sounds like bad homework, but it's actually one of the things that can make your game the best. And that is have your characters write solid backstories about who they are and why they're doing anything. They're going to come up with something. Who cares what it is at this point? Some of them, it may be what you would consider it's like, I was always, a big guy who would take any dare, and somebody dared me to go into the arena and I did, and I became a fighter. And now I have to fight everybody and be the best. Okay. So that's one character's backstory. That may not be super deep. Another character may be like, I lived with a small family who raised sheep. And one day I came home and the whole family was killed. And I vowed that I would do whatever it took to avenge them or to find out who their murderer was. And I still don't know. And that's my quest. And you get 2 or 3 of those, and they're going to be wildly different.
Yeah.
Your job as the GM then is to like take all of those and to take this thing that is going to kind of be the arc of your story and begin to weave. You become a weaver, but it's important. You weave that tapestry, you weave that rug together in such a way that it begins to make this grand picture, right? So it's not just your story, the arc that you want to tell. And it's not just this guy who's fighting in the arena and wants to be the best that's going to be told. And it's not just this guy who lived with the sheep herding family that's going to be told. It's going to be all of those in one greater story. That, again, is your job as the GM. And I think truthfully, new GMs are rarely told this. They're just told, well, get a book, get a module, and, just see how it goes. Mm-hmm. And that will get you somewhere. That will get you introduced to the game. That will get you and your players introduced to what role-playing is at a at one level, but it's going to be a surface level. You want to talk about the games that begin to mean more. It's the ones where the characters invest more at the beginning, and then you invest more as the GM throughout, and everybody begins to invest in that cooperative storytelling that we continue to talk about.
Yeah.
And it begins to be something. And so you want to talk about, like, why does the world need a hero? Start with, what's your character's backstories and motivations? And so they may or may not be good at coming up with these motivations on their own. And in those kinds of cases, there's little tricks and things you can do as GM to help that. One of the things that I have done is, and I think there's probably multiple things. Hopefully I don't mix them up too much, but I did a thing where I rolled on a chart, or I rolled twice on a chart, and okay, I'm getting mixed up here. I had every player have to have two connections. Okay, so a connection with one other player and a connection with a different player. So in theirs, and I think I rolled those on a chart, right?
Yeah, that was true.
So in the Dormant Mind campaign, the only one that's coming to mind right now. So we did this. Remember, I had, if you've been following this Rise of the GM, you hear that we've had the Dormant Mind 1.0 and the Dormant Mind 2.0 because we had a party start the campaign that then kind of went all over the place. It dissolved, and then another group of guys came in, and I decided I had more to tell in this story, and so we continued in that same campaign, and they met up with where, they started in a different place, but met up with where that first party was, and then continued on to fulfill kind of the arc of my story. But in each case, they had connections with one another. And so Cormac had, I think it was Brandon's, Cormac, I pointed out. Adam was Cormac. Brandon Harris's character,
Ragnar.
which is Ragnar, knew something about his past. Was what when they rolled it, it's like, something about his past. And so and I forget exactly what all you rolled, but part of your backstory was that some orcs had come through and killed your family, right? And you went insane and destroyed all of them. And Ragnar saw you go insane and destroy all of them. And so he knows this about you, and you keep him close because of what he knows about you. So that's why you started kind of tailing him a bit and starting into this adventure. Now, obviously there was I need to avenge my family. If there's orcs out there, I want to kill them. That was part of your whole thing.
Except for when I would forget that.
Except for when you forget that and toast them and give them big old buckets of ale.
It was all a distraction.
You did end up killing them. So you had kind of this personal reason to start that then evolved. And in conjunction with that, you followed this guy. Josh, who is always in our comments, who's in our comments here right now, his family, I think also, his mother also was killed by orcs, right? And he was stuck in a well the whole time. Am I making this up?
She did die to start out with.
And he hated water, right? Because he was stuck in this well. He was hidden in this well the whole time. We're not saying he was a coward. Josh, you can. Oh, yep. He says, yep, that is correct. He hates water now because he was in this well the whole time that the orcs were killing everybody above. And that's how he ended up not dying. And then he, went on. So anyway, you can do these things to help you, with tables and rolling and giving people connections, but then you tie that in with what they have decided is their own backstory. And you take those things and you say, okay, if you have people in this situation and they have these connections, and I know this is going on in the world, why do they become the heroes? That's part of it. You as GM, you're going to do that because yes, obviously there are really powerful people in the world. Philosophically, you don't know why these more powerful people aren't the ones to solve everything. Maybe they tried and they can't. Maybe they don't care. maybe they're part of what's making the problem, these powerful people. There's lots of reasons, but then you as GM have to decide why this group becomes heroes and
Yeah.
why the world needs them in particular. And I always love to, this is just me and me. We could have titled this podcast, instead of Rise of the GM, we could have titled it like Epic, because everything I do is epic. Or we could have titled it something else. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I always, prophetic, that could have been a good one for me. I always feel like I want my characters to have been like the come from humble beginnings, but
Mm,
there is more in them than even they knew. And there is
yeah.
prophesied of them that this thing is going to happen.
Right.
Maybe
Right.
they
Right.
don't ever read that prophecy, but
Yeah.
it comes
Yeah.
along. I think, in the Oracle of Order, I had like a direct prophecy to start the whole thing
Mm,
off. In this one, I didn't have a direct prophecy, but I did have you guys find the Sarkonian prophecies, which
yeah.
have
Right.
never all been found or interpreted. The most correct, prophet in the world, this old insane woman, wrote all this stuff down, and nobody even realized it was prophecy until
Right.
years
Yeah.
later. But it was this multi-volume set of prophecies.
Hmm.
That gives me a little place to dip in anytime. You can
Yeah.
come across another Sarkonian prophecy,
Hmm. Yeah. For sure.
or
For
you
sure.
could interpret some Sarkonian prophecies. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I think you could have, for me as a GM, you could have said epic and prophecy are reasons why.
Yeah. For
I
sure.
always have to have this. All right. Again, I realize I just go off on tangents and ramble. Thoughts
That's what we
that have
do.
come up in that
That's what
there
we
for
do.
you.
Um, yeah, I love the backstory, driving that, and a couple ways to do that. That's like a situation. I don't know I've talked about it, but the campaign I'm running didn't begin that way. It wasn't intended that way. So it's been in a lot of ways, there's been like a piecemeal background happening over the course. It's like writing a background while playing the game in a lot of ways, depending on who the
Yeah.
character is or who the player is. And that kind of goes back, I think, to the style of play you're looking for. We can always look back at those 8 types of fun, and there's going to be, you may be a player out there or a GM that it's like a huge backstory is not your jam. You want to have a pretty basic, like, this is where I came from. I was in a martial arts school, and then I was sent out into the world to hone my craft. Like that may be your backstory. And if that's
It's
like,
all about growth,
yeah, it's
getting
like, if that's
better.
what you want,
Yep.
that's cool. Like, make sure to do what's like the fun thing for you and how you can develop. Or you may be somebody who's like, I'm going to name off my mom, dad, all my cousins, brothers and sisters, and I have like a family tree that's built back and how we were connected to the royal family. And here's the thing that sent me out from home, and how I had like apprenticed under this blacksmith who, it's like, there's all this stuff that that may be what we want too. And again, that's like, if that's your style, that's cool. Um, but I think, like, because of the game, uh, style of the beginnings for me, I've had to kind of work that with people of like, okay, like, how much do you want to bring into this? And some of that has been a lot and some of it has been little. But like, a thing I wanted to say was like, if you're listening to the backstory stuff here, and I do think I'd like to do a whole episode on just like, how do we help people write their backstories and kind of get into that. But if you're like, man, like, you know, we've done a ton of sessions. We've done like 30 sessions of this campaign, and I never pushed for like backstory. Like, I don't think it's too late, even in that. There's been stuff that's been built, obviously, but you can start working with your people and being like, asking some direct questions about, what is your character's family like? What was their upbringing like? What's something that was important to them, and getting some information to be able to bring into it. I don't think it's ever too late for that stuff to come out. And it's even like, people don't tell everybody every single thing about their lives, and I doubt an adventuring party does. There may be some characters that would, but that can be even like surprises that come out about your characters and can drive them forward, which is really kind of what I was coming around to. Is, with this game, Jade Mask's game, I've wanted to do that spotlighting with people when possible, and not everybody has been yet, and I want that to be a case. But one of the driving forces, like with Matthew's character, with your character Matthew, Eliakim, is there has been a very driving force of your brother was there was this complicated relationship between your family, between your father and older brother and younger brother, and a lot of that has played into some of the travels recently, particularly with like your youngest brother has been captured and is being like basically was enslaved, and so you're trying to get him back, and that's like a driving thing. There was some stuff at the beginning with Ozoff, and just his tie-in to the the guard and the prison and the way that he had been in the city, and those are like that personal, I think that personal kind of quest that you're, or that's kind of my term for what you were saying, like the personal drive for, you're being driven as a character toward heroics because you're trying to get your brother back. But in the midst of that, like you said, there is this larger situation happening that actually that's kind of tied into, but it's also a different thing. And the group, because of the bond of friendship or just the desire to adventure, whatever it is, like they're going along, but there's also this like larger thing they're getting drawn into. And I think those are like good parallel things to think about as a GM of how can I bring that backstory in to like grip, like specifically, I want to grip Ben tonight at the table and have him like engage with something that's connected to his character, but also the whole group, there's something spurring them on to adventure in this way. So that's a good like parallel thing, I think, to think through for sure, like you said.
And truthfully, in that game, I was kind of going along, learning my character at the first, just kind of figuring out what does this guy do mechanically,
Right.
kind of what's his character, what's his attitude. But it wasn't until you sent me a DM on the side
Hmm.
saying, "Hey, tell me some of your family," and I think you only asked me for names.
Yeah.
I can't remember, but then me being who I am, I'm like, oh, there's my father, but then there's my, I've always hated my father, but I'm always like trying to get his approval, even
Mhm.
though I hate him, because
Yeah.
he always gave everything to our older brother
Mhm.
and sent him to the Wizards College and paid for him. And then me and my younger brother never got anything, and I had to like take care of my younger brother because often he wouldn't have even been fed or had what he
Mhm.
needed because our father was such a, he was so enamored with the prestige of our older brother.
Right.
When in fact, I also had magic, and my father, like threw me by the wayside and apprenticed me out to a blacksmith. And like I ended up inventing this whole like all these relational conflicts.
Right.
And it was only at that point that then I really began to like super get invested into the story of what was going on. Before that, you could have thrown anything in front of me. I'd be like, oh yeah, I'd fly up in the air and I'd shoot it
Right.
with my hand cannon,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
whatever. I didn't care what we were doing. I was gonna, I was part of a thieves guild who didn't really want to steal, but I was just doing that to make sure that my brother,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it was only once I put in that I was doing what I had to do to make sure my brother could
Right.
survive, but I didn't really want to be, I didn't care about thieves and I didn't feel like it
Mhm.
was right. That kind of stuff then began to give me more of this is how I'm going to react in every situation,
Yeah.
and a reason. At first there was like a strong hatred for my brother, but even during the game, that kind of like tempered because we
Mhm.
went and saw my brother and there was some arguing, but at the same time, there
Yeah.
was like starting to make amends a little bit and see
Right.
that he wasn't always as bad as I thought he was when we were growing up. And he like left early in my life, and
Mhm.
there was this strong hatred for him, and that coupled with like trying to find my younger brother who I always cared for, all of this gave me reason. Gave me a reason to be out here doing more than just shooting people with my hand cannon. So that I think that's kind of stuff can happen at the beginning, or it can happen any time in there, because this was like in the game. Because like you said, you started off, I wasn't even in the first session, right? You started off with a couple other guys because me and maybe another guy, Chris, I think, we were gone.
Right.
And we were just like, oh, we'll do something while you're gone. It kept going. And then you ask these questions and begin to let us have a reason why are we doing this? Why are we heroes in this in the first place? And I do think that's important. Josh, in our comments here, said, hey, I have a Google Doc that players fill out for their backstory, so players have at least a vague idea of some things that I'm looking for. I think that's a really good idea. Again, we think not enough GMs actually get this idea of how do you help people create backstories. They just kind of throw in with a book, and the players get together and they're going. The cool thing is this can be done at any time, because like we just said with this one, it was only after a while that we decided, hey, we're going to continue going with this and turn it into a full campaign. You didn't even have like the main, the main idea of the ley lines in place at the beginning. That spurred out. But then you ask us all questions, and then you, as the GM, you begin to take our answers to my family relationships and to, I can't think of any of the other guys' backstories. They're not important in my life. No, they are important in my life. But you took all of those that you got from them with the Shining Guard. What's his name? Brandon Harris.
Ozoff.
Ozoff. Couldn't even remember his name. You took Ozoff's backstory. You took Leonis's backstory, which I don't even fully know myself yet. I get hints of it here and there. You took all these and you begin to weave them in with this idea of the ley lines that kind of surfaced, and you begin to do that, in your spare time. But all of this is saying that you, as the GM, begin to make this something greater than, all right, you go and fight some bad guys. All right, you go and fight some more bad guys. All right, you go and fight some more bad guys. You begin to make this something that's more important. That's what being a GM is all about. That's how you can take this and elevate what it is to a higher level.
Just reiterating that, I think that's like a really good asking some of those questions and just getting the answer. Like any answer from your group is a really good tool as a GM, because that, like, I mean, the answer Matthew you gave me, which was, here are the names of my immediate family and how we related to each other. I mean, honestly, is driven, maybe not, in a lot of ways driven, at least the locational stuff of, even though there's other stuff going around it.
Partially because my character's so forceful. It's like, hey guys, we're all going here. You're with me, right?
Like, all right. I mean, probably two arcs of this game, and the way I think of it, were kind of like the line of movement was driven by that short conversation, and that's like creative fodder for the GM of, if I have this plan of, I want to tie in Leonis's culture, or I want to tie in Eliakim's family relationships, or I want to look at Torgen's like trauma in his backstory and like what that's going to do. Spoiler. Like what, like those things can expand a lot about like the world and the story, and like, again, the personal heroics that maybe will happen. So that's a good tool. Just ask some questions about like, what is your character about? What drives them? What's the background of them? And then kind of play with it. Well, I think we could leave it at that for now, on that, and kind of move into, we have like one haversack question, but we do have our NPC that we make use of, and the NPC is is from the Masks group from Gnome Stew. Sorry, I'm pulling it up here. But this is one of the people that Gnome Stew has written about. We've used this a lot, but this is maybe a more neutral of a character that you could use in your games. So I'm going to read this here. This guy's name is Porter Shingles, Porter Shingles, and he is a ruthless thug. Porter Shingles, the ruthless thug. He says, uh, just tell me what needs doing, and I'll see that it's done. So long as I don't have to cross my friends and I gets me cut, I'm your man. His appearance, he's a has rugged features with a bulbous nose that's bent to the right after being broken many times. With a patchily whiskered chin, he always looks in need of a shave. He walks a bit hunched over, and he favors his left leg. He's got a little bit of a limp there. Even in baggy clothes, his massive arms and his giant fists are evident. As far as role playing, Porter, um, just before walloping somebody, he repeatedly pounds his fist threateningly in his other hand, giving them one last chance to comply. So he's like basically showing, I'm going to take you out. If you don't comply with what I want, you're about to get pounded here. His personality, on the job, he's always ruthless. With those dearest to him, though, he has a heart of gold. He doesn't think of himself as a criminal. The people who hire him as a leg breaker might be, but not him. He's turned down a few jobs, not many, just those that involve his friends. As far as motivation, despite the toll of passing years, he still relies on his fists. It's all that he knows. So he's motivated by um, being able to basically make his living by roughhousing people. And his background is a dock worker in his youth. Porter picked up extra cash as a prize fighter. When he got too old for the ring, he hired himself out as muscle for dockside gangs, for the chieftain that needed a collection agent, and he earned a grudging respect for how he worked. His strength was beginning to give way to his age, so he lets his reputation as a prize fighter do most of the intimidation work for him. So that's Porter Shingles, the ruthless thug that uses his fists to get what he needs.
I like
Yeah.
Porter. I think one reason I like Porter is because he is truly a neutral character. And
Yeah.
I think in the book, the Mask book by Gnomes 2, they open this section of the neutral characters with the statement that like one bad break could turn this person into one bad year could turn this person into a villain pretty quick.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
if somebody gives them a hand and helps them out, could turn them into someone of honor pretty quick. They're just kind of really right in the middle,
Yeah.
and they're really on that balance, can go one way or the other. And I see Porter like this. He was a guy who, he used to be more, and then when all that ended, he did what he could to get by, and now he's aging, and he's just kind of relying on that, who he was in the past, and he still has some strength, but you can tell his body's starting to let him down. And I love these kind of characters because I think they can fit in as a GM when you need a character that can be molded one way or the other.
Right.
Based on what the players do. And so I love a player like this. He comes in for who knows what reason. He meets your characters. You could throw this guy in a multitude of places. And then based on how your characters respond to him, he could turn into someone who helps them a lot, or he could turn into someone who hinders them a lot, or he could turn into someone who really becomes a true villain, and I like that as far as an NPC goes in my characters. And so a lot of times when you're a GM and you have your campaign already in mind, you have your encounter already in mind, but your characters turn around and start talking to some dude, and you're like, oh, I got to have a character. This is the ideal kind of character. He can be like this huge kind of meathead who seems like doesn't have a lot going on, but based on how your characters respond to him and react to him and talk to him more or talk to him less or threaten him, he can he can fall on one side of the fence or the other, and you can allow that to happen. So I like Porter Shingles. I like those neutral characters. We've often had in here villains, ones who obviously are doing something evil.
Right.
This guy, he's just doing what he has to do to make money, and does it sometimes, come out to be bad for some people? Yeah. Turn out to be good for other people? Yeah. Does he have some honor? Yes, he doesn't hurt his friends. Anybody who he deems as a friend, he won't take
Right.
the job. So you can find as a party whatever you want in this guy.
Hmm.
And so he's not that villain. He's
Yeah.
also not this shining righteous, beacon of I do nothing that is harm to
Right.
anyone. He's not that paladin who walks straight over the rock and keeps
Yeah.
going. He
Yeah.
is he is a character who is there to be shaped and molded. And so I think these kinds of characters can be very helpful for you as a GM
Hmm.
to drop into in front of your characters and let them kind of dictate what's going to happen to this guy and what path is he going to take.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this kind of character has enough complexity, and it shows like change. They're not just this like one uniform type of personality every time you even interact with them. I think like you can see different facets of of a, a personality. I like him too because I think like you can see, say I think I'd want them to like be endeared to him first and then see him shaking somebody down, and it's like, whoa, Porter, like what's up with this, like kind of like to have that questioning instead of I mean, I guess you could do it the other way, but I feel like if you just immediately show the thuggery right away, they're just going to come in and crack his skull and
Your
be done with
party's
it,
like, oh yeah, we'll show him. We'll
Yeah,
just kill him
right.
because we kill
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah, because yeah, murder hobos for life, and so like if he's like bottom around at the tavern for whatever reason because the the half orc beat him in an arm wrestling thing, or they had like a boxing match or something in the thing, like there's been some respect earned, they're friendly, and they're like, well, now he's over here like beating up peasants for gold, like what's going on. You can have some conversations there and do some role play and even some uh explanations, or maybe there's some character growth, or maybe there's some character devolving that happens with him and that. But you also have like a friend, if you've made friends with him, maybe there's some like, now I have a contact in this gang and there's some information, and now that we're friendly, he's not going to do a job against us, but he may pass some information on. Like I think that can even be like some of the information giver, of the world that we've talked about before too. So it,
And I mean, you look at any movie, what could be more inspiring than when you have the guy who's kind of the hulking idiot who used to be bad, but becomes the lovable kind
yeah,
of person and then all of a sudden the bad guy kills them completely.
yeah,
You
right,
could have that happen in this. And
yep,
man, then your party who was seeing the redemption in Porter,
yep,
seeing Porter decide he was going to like live a different
right,
life, but he's still kind of caught up in this mess. And then all of a sudden they do this to him. And then your
yeah,
party just goes nuts on some
yep,
people.
yep. When you
So,
introduce him, he always wears a red shirt, and you just know the red
he's
shirt always dies.
see, you got to get him out of that red shirt so it's not so obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a good one. He's a good one.
I like Porter. All right. Well, that's Porter. Hopefully you can use him in a campaign. And by the way, you guys get to see the real way the sausage is made here. My computer crashed in the middle of that, and Adam just kind of kept going and took over there. So thanks, Adam, for doing that. I'm back. You can tell we work on a huge budget. All of our great equipment is a computer that is old. But we're going to go ahead to our haversack because that's still working. The haversack still offers up a question every time we pop our hand in there. What do we got this week?
So we got a train for sure, but this is from Benjamin West. He says, "Hi guys." Uh, so a little backstory to put this: Ben works at a high school, and there's a handful of groups that have been playing D&D, and I did a couple different editions, and he's kind of been, I don't know if he's a sponsor or just like creating kind of the space for them to be able to do that, but he says one of the high school groups just finished their current fantasy era campaign, and they're wanting to start a noir Lovecraftian campaign. I'm thinking it could be cool if the student GM incorporates some Easter eggs sprinkled into the campaign about their long deceased former PCs. I'm assuming that's from this fantasy area campaign. That's just my assumption here. But he says this: I'm planning to show him Doom That Came to Gotham comics from DC Universe to help with some inspiration about the era and the world. Any pointers or drips would be cool and useful for him, I'm sure. And he signs off Torgan, which is his character in the Jade Masks. So the big question is like, how can you sprinkle info about past characters into a campaign? You got any thoughts on that, Matthew?
Well, obviously, I deal mostly in fantasy. I don't do a lot of noir. I don't do a lot of Lovecraftian stuff, although that's the whole Call of Cthulhu, right? Or yeah, I think that was all
Yeah, that's kind
Lovecraft.
of that.
If you're in a fantasy, obviously, I talked already about my love of prophecy, and there can be lots of stuff where they go back and talk about, in the ancient times of old, blah 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 happened, and you mentioned stuff that a character does that they would recognize. Maybe you don't even have to name the character at first. You can do some stuff, and they can be like, "Oh, that's like when so and so," and then like later you can like, have little drips and drops of those histories being pulled forward. So
Yeah.
now, how do you do that in this real noir kind of Lovecraftian thing?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know a lot about that kind of setting personally, but you could have. You wouldn't want to have one of them come back as like this tentacle mouthed creature or anything. That'd be disturbing, because you just want them to be like their characters remembered. You don't want to destroy their character's legacy. But you can have something where there is this written record of something that happened with this character. So
Yeah.
that's very general, very vague. I'm sorry, Ben, and Ben's group, if you're watching this, that I don't know a lot about noir or Lovecraft. I have read Lovecraft, and I do like his old stories and stuff. But
Yeah. Yeah. I have a handful of thoughts. You hit on one, Matthew, and that's like the written record, of things of like, and I do think, kind of pulling back a minute to, no matter what the genre, I think I'll use that word. Like, I think this stuff could fit regardless of whether it's noir Cthulhu or Lovecraftian, I guess is the word, or another fantasy game, or whatever. If it's in the same world, I think these things could translate a little bit for that. But um, if it's not the same world, I'm going to start with that. If it's not the same world, I think there's some like meta nods that you can do, and that's like, I'm going to stick with my bard thing. The bard tells a story that's essentially a story about the old party. Like that's a thing where if it's simply for like, hey, I want to make a nod towards the old campaign, it's not canon like history or mythos or anything like that, but this is just a story that's being told. We can do that, and that's like, oh, that was awesome because that was our people, and I think you could do that. If it's within the same world, I do think like the written record of, uh, you know, they're in a ruin and they come across an old chest, that's buried, and they pop it open, and there's a packet of letters that was written from one of the old characters to the love of their life, or like a journal that they kept while they were adventuring. Like you could kind of do some of those things to like bring that story in a little bit.
even as they're going through this old ruin, you could have hieroglyphs. And do things
Yeah.
that are very like recognizable. Say you had a guy
Yeah.
who always turned into a giant, huge tiger,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you could have like you could describe some of that, and then let their brains be the thing that figure out. Wait, that's like so and so. Wait a minute,
Yeah.
and this guy did, and this figure here's doing this. That's like our old characters, and
Mhm.
maybe they don't ever recognize that you did that on purpose, or maybe they
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. 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 The hieroglyphs, tapestries, paintings, like that's a great idea. That kind of stuff. And I do think that was a good point too, Matthew, of like, to not, because I have a tendency to really, really want people to grab those things, but to not be like, yeah, you see this just like your old characters and your old campaign, like to not totally just say directly like this is you guys, in that, but to explain it and let it be. And then if they start connecting to, I think that's a really cool thing and
If
works
you
better.
say it and you're like really forward with it, what will happen is at the table, you'll get like chuckles around like, oh yeah, that was us. That was awesome. And everybody's like,
Yeah.
ah, for a moment, you'll have that memory. If you let it hang, it may end up being one of those things where they don't get it at all. They don't get any more than that there was a picture of a guy turning into this large tiger, and they don't quite understand what that's about. They don't interact with it again and
Yeah.
whatever. Or it could dawn on one of them,
Yeah.
or a couple of them. And I think there's always more. It's that spark of joy that happens when we figure something out that we didn't anticipate figuring out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
so yeah, you can play that any way, in any level of heavy-handedness to light hints,
Right.
anywhere on
Yeah.
that continuum that you
Yeah.
want.
Yeah, for sure. Another like nod that I like within the same world, if you're like, 100 years in the future or whatever, is the idea of like relic weapons or relic items, kind of thing of I brought this up and it's not something that's in anyone's hand, but in my first campaign, Matthew's character had an insane sword that I didn't look at the rules well enough. So I allowed some things. And it had all these they're not power stones, they're called
What were they?
it's D&D 3.5.
Yeah,
They were
or weapon gems or something.
weapon, they're jewels or gems or stones or something. Someone who knows 3.5 maybe can fit that in.
We
But
used to know it.
yeah. And he had a bunch of them in there, and I realized much later, I'm like, oh yeah, I should have read the rules. You're supposed to have like one. I think there were like 4 or 5 in it, but um, basically there was a point in this newest game where I believe it was Torgun was asking like, what are some like epic augment crystals? Thank you,
Augment
Rob.
crystals. We both saw it at the same time.
Yeah,
And yes, one sword to rule them all.
um, Torgan was asking about just like epic weapons, and I started explaining that weapon, and I'm unveiling here a little bit too, but I was explaining, I'd never said, oh, that was Keegan Tracy's, which I just said it wrong again, but Tracy's sword from
Tracy.
Kagan Tracy from that. But I, talk about there was a sword that was used like many years ago that had the ability to hold more of these augment crystals for whatever reason than most people can handle, and talked about that. And that was, again, probably didn't land super well because we played that campaign 20 years ago and or 16 years ago or whatever it was. And these other guys didn't really know that, but that was a nod back to, this is the same world. It's only been 25, 30 years, you know, all these people are probably alive out there somewhere, but there's this weapon of great renown that, people know of, kind of thing. So you kind of made a motion when I said that. Or were you thinking about anything relic
Well, it
wise?
made me think. So we have a guy we play with now, Royal Robinson, who was telling me about a campaign where he had this character that, and I can't remember. I won't remember the whole story like he told it, which was really great. But he had this character that made a deal, something with the gods, and the gods were all, when you get to 30th level, when you get past epic, you get to 30th level, you become a god, and then you can no longer have a direct hand in the world, right? And so he had this character that he got up to like level 29, and the something in this story was that every time he made an intelligent weapon, it took so much of his experience, right? And so he kept making these intelligent weapons. He could craft them, and so he kept crafting these intelligent weapons until he had like, I don't know, his whole body was covered with daggers and swords and headbands of all these intelligent weapons to keep his XP low, because once he became a god, all the other gods were like going to
Oh,
be after
where?
him because of
Yeah, yeah,
something he
yeah.
had
Right.
done.
Uh,
And so at some point, he realized he could not do anymore, could not carry anymore, and he was going to be found. And he was thrown into this pocket universe, and all of his items were scattered.
yeah.
Hundreds
Right.
of years later, this became the thing that the party was trying to do. They had to gather these relics of old,
Mm,
and because getting them together would make something happen. But
right.
anyway, it was a really kind of cool callback because it was all of this guy's intelligent weapons and armor and whatever, and it all had like little pieces of him in it, and it was kind of a cool way to call
Yeah.
back. You made me think of that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
could tell
That
that
was
story
cool.
way better than me. Maybe someday we'll have him on this podcast to
Yeah.
talk about that very idea
Yeah. For
because
sure.
he was doing a thing where he was playing a character in this campaign where they were kind of hearkening back to his character who had all of these,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
was cool.
That is a cool story. I'd love to hear him tell that more. My third piece of this, just to like finish out what I'm thinking of, is um, harkening back to locations. And that
Hmm.
sounds like, well, how does that connect to a person? And you can think of, let's go with in The Hobbit. Bilbo gets captured by the trolls, and there's a whole situation where the trolls end up turning to stone at the end. Well, in the Lord of the Rings, there's a point where they cross through that, and there's this point back to, hey, it's the trolls that Bilbo always told us about. And I think you can use that idea of, if you're working in the same world, even if time has passed, it's like you start explaining, I don't know, maybe the massive battle that took place at the end, or a place where there was a very like important moment with a character and an NPC or something that they're going to remember. And again, it's not like, oh, this was the place, remember? But it's like you start explaining the details of this place, and starts to trigger remembrances of, oh, well, my old character was here, or we had this huge battle here, or I remember things about that. I think that can be a really cool aspect too, to just kind of harken back to those. This is a lot of what I'm thinking about right now, in a lot of ways, of like, uh in my game, a lot of what has taken place was not connected locationally to the old game. It, like, there hasn't been really crossover of like location, but there's a possibility at some point, and it depends on what the group wants to do. But the locations could swoop up the map a little bit and end up in places that the older group had been. So I've been thinking about that a lot, of like, okay, like what things would actually connect, and what could be a cool like look back on that too. So I like this question a lot, because it's like helping me work through that stuff too.
And for me, this question's helping because I'm the only one who was in that previous
Right.
game. And so if anything comes up to remember, I'm the one that's going to have to put it together. So I'm going to have to like do some
Yeah,
thinking
yeah,
about that
yeah,
old game.
yeah. There was one, I know I've mentioned it's kind of like the Baba Yaga type hag that you guys encountered. I've talked about this on the podcast, and you guys just kind of like walked away from it. It's like, well, here's three options. You're like, we're going to take option 4, which is to attack you and then leave, and one of those options was one of these connecting points too. And I'm not going to go too much into it, but I was like really, really wanting it, because maybe kind of self-indulgent, of like, oh, this is like, can connect to the old campaign, and you wouldn't know at all, because we didn't look at it. But I'm still holding out hope that some of those things will connect at some point and
By the way,
have fun.
total tangent here.
Mhm.
There was the Baba Yaga was old folklore. I think it was Slovenia at first, Slavic,
Okay.
Russian, or right around in there. This idea of the house that walked on chicken legs, the hag that lived in the house that walked on chicken legs through the wood, and it wasn't known if was she really bad or was she really good, because she would take children, right? But
Mm,
she would, some of the folklore is that she would take children from families that were mistreating them, and so you don't know if
okay.
she was
Yeah.
all of this. I just recently came across a book called Into the Forest, and it's like a bunch of modern day authors doing stories about the Baba Yaga character.
Oh, really?
It's
Huh.
the whole book is just a compendium of those stories. I haven't read it. I don't have it. I
Uh,
thought about getting it. It's just interesting.
yeah, yeah. That's cool.
All right. Well, hey, I think, are there any more questions in the haversack this week?
That was the last one in the
That was it.
haversack. Yep.
Well, guys, we need more questions from y'all. But that's going to end us here for today. We're glad you could join us here on Rise to the GM to talk about what it is that makes the world need a hero. Hopefully we gave you some ideas there, and an NPC and an encounter and some stuff that you can use to drip some kind of old information into your stories. But again, we're glad you could join us here, and we invite you to join us again next week as we talk about what, Adam?
Next week, we will be talking about groups within the world, things like cults, things like, cults, guilds, and factions next week in our world building.
Guilds, and factions next week here on Rise of the GM. Join us for that and more. See you later.